this is really part 2 of the death video, and this will have a bit more death in because I probably didn't talk about death as much as I intended. By death, I guess I would mean facing limited time. So how am I spending my time is one thing that you may be wondering about. I am trying to spend as much time with my kids as possible. A very practical barrier is that it's difficult for me to spend a lot of time outside, but I want my kids to be outside as much as possible. The reason it's difficult for me to spend a lot of time outside at the moment is winter in Japan is quite hostile. The air is very, very dry, and it's very, very cold. Or at least it feels cold when you're having chemotherapy and you're kind of weak and feeble like I am. You know, I've kind of become this frail old man, which is really weird, and I still find it hard to deal with. So yeah, try and spend as much time with the kids as possible. So my daughter Jessica, she's 3 years old. Been doing a lot of work with her, getting her to learn to count, which has been very rewarding for me. Hopefully she likes it as well. And I'm just starting to teach her to read as well, which I think she's going to learn very quickly because she's very, very highly motivated and keeps asking me what things say, and is very interested in how it all works. With my son Edward, he is 7. He'll be 8 in end of February, and one of the things I really want him to be able to do is be a very competent programmer, possibly before I cease to exist, which which is not a trivial thing. It's not clear how people learn to become good programmers. It's not even clear what a good programmer is. Most of the computer software we have in the world is disgusting, quite frankly. Pathetic. Absolute junk. Wastes our time. And you very, very, very quickly get into very big issues when you look into other ways of doing things, superior ways of doing things. And a lot of it comes down to the nature of education in general. What should I be teaching my son, 7-year-old boy, soon to be 8 years old? I probably have very limited time with him, maybe a year, hopefully a bit longer. If the immunotherapy works, could be a couple of years. 2% chance that the immunotherapy will work. Clutching at straws, but still. But what, how do I teach him to be, I guess, far more intelligent than I am as a 37-year-old? Every day I realise how dumb I am, really, because I expose myself to very, very, very smart people, and recently I've been watching Alan Kay talk basically every day. I'll watch some of his talks, and he's probably the greatest living philosopher, I guess you'd say, or educationalist, or computer scientist, or whatever you like, however you like to label him. And every time I watch him talk, it brings up a whole bunch of feelings and pressures and ideas, because I have limited time and I want to be teaching my son whatever is going to prepare him most for the changing world that he's living in, which is exactly the kind of thing Alan Kay talks about. And one of the reasons that humans are always in such a state is that we prepare children for our past, not for their future. A trivial example is when I was doing my A-levels, so I guess 17, 18 years old, whatever. One of my tutors, or who was sort of helping a group of us who were interested in going to Oxford or Cambridge, he talked about his time leaving school in the 1950s. On his last day of school, walking home from school, had multiple job offers because there was a labour shortage in the UK in the 1950s. When he went to Cambridge University to study theology, at that time the government paid people to go to university, essentially with grants, and I think the university was responsible for a grant called beer money, which was literally for the students to buy their beer. And it's interesting that only a few years before that, students at Cambridge and Oxford got 2 votes. You got a vote where your hometown was, and you got a vote from Cambridge, Oxford. So you voted twice in the general elections. You double the democracy. So that was the world that he grew up in, and yet he was somehow preparing us for the 21st century. And he did his best, and maybe did quite a good job. But generally, how do I, with a potentially very, very limited time, although I homeschool my son, so I have much more time with him than most parents would have with a 7-year-old boy. But how do I teach him? What do I teach him? Obviously, I'm thinking about my own death a lot, and death in general, and time in general, and what's valuable in life. There are all those practical things that I'd have liked to be teaching him over 20, 30, 40 years, which is not going to happen. How do I get that over a few months? Realistically, I mean, how limited is my time? I keep saying this, I might have a year, which is what the doctors are telling me, but it's not 12 good months, maybe 6 good months, 8 good months, and then it's into hospital to spend those last few months possibly in a lot of pain, or drugged up to the eyeballs and morphine. So that's kind of the dominating thought in my head at the moment is how and what do I teach my children, my son particularly, and of course, I need to teach him how to teach as well, because he'll be teaching his younger sister a lot. What is important, how do you prepare someone for a future you haven't lived in? What's his life going to be like? An obvious trivial thing, very, very likely he's never going to drive a car. That's a very strange thing to be thinking about. 7 years old now, say 10, 11 years in the future, whatever. In England, you can take a driving test at 18 at the moment. Never going to drive a car. That's weird, because self-driving cars are going to be very common in 5 years' time. They'll be the norm in 10 years' time. There might be lots of other tasks that are quite normal for us now that he's not going to do. Probably practical, maybe trivial things. I mean, we're now living in a time where the vast majority of people in the developed world have never lit a fire, for example. Well, I'd say vast majority, I mean the vast majority of young people. We don't do it, So those kind of very practical things now that are going to be irrelevant for him, because of just how daily lifestyle is going to change. But what about more important stuff like managing information, comparing information, making decisions? I'm making life and death decisions at the moment about my cancer treatment, and nothing, or very, very little that I learned at school is helping me. Some of the mathematics I learnt is helping a bit. At least it's making me very, very, very sceptical when I read a report of a clinical trial and see that it involves a handful of people and resulted in a very small difference of a result between the two groups, for example. So that's helped, but generally we're not taught really how you make decisions when you have incomplete, low-quality information that contradicts itself, let alone contradicts all the other information out there, which is exactly the kind of situation I'm in at the moment. And in fact, is actually quite a common situation for what used to be called knowledge workers, so people who deal with knowledge on a daily basis as the main thing they're doing. Instead of maybe making something physical, they are creating knowledge from information and data, or comparing knowledge, collating knowledge, that kind of thing. So what about the more philosophical, emotional, you could even say spiritual stuff that's so vital in life? How do I teach that? Well, I have very little, like most people, very little grip on a lot of that stuff anyway. And I need to impart whatever I can in the next few months to my son. And in between thinking about all this kind of what you could say is action-oriented stuff, I'm very, very frightened of dying, and very frightened of what it's going to be like towards the end. The last few months, I'm going to be in a lot of pain, or I'm going to be helpless. I'm going to be kind of pathetic. What that's going to be like, what it's going to be like for my family to see me go through that. And even though all this other stuff is still going on, I occasionally think that if I had the chance for a longer life, there's so much other stuff I'd like to do. So many things I'd like to do that take several years to do. I'd like to really study the work of the philosopher Buckminster Fuller, and I think he wrote maybe 20 books, and a few of them take about a year to get into, to really get a grip of. Anyway, thanks for listening. More videos coming soon. Please go to www.matthewdons.org and help me out if you can. Thanks a lot.